Welcome everybody, and I think it's still time to say Happy New Year to everybody. So thank you for being here today. The first bit of information is to let you know that the Mayor has tendered his apologies for this meeting due to illness, and Councillor Craig Cheney will be deputising. Welcome, Craig. Welcome also to members of the public in the gallery who are attending today, and to if there's anybody in the conference hall, and of course also to those watching via YouTube today or in the future. For those in the building, I'd like to draw your attention to the emergency evacuation procedure. Leave the chamber towards via the nearest entrance, and then we congregate at the cathedral. As with any council meeting, please treat each other with due courtesy, tolerance and respect. Thank you. Agenda item 2, which is apologies for absence. I've received apologies from Mayor Rees and Councillors Ali, Morris, Quarterly, Stafford Townsend and Y. Are there any other apologies to note? No? Thank you. Item number 3, declarations of interest. I understand that there are a number of declarations of disclosable pecuniary interests in respect of the Golden Motion today, because members are either a landlord or a tenant in the private rental sector, which I understand will have been registered with the monitoring officer as a sensitive interest. Please, could I have a show of hands to confirm those councillors who have a disclosable pecuniary interest to declare in the Golden Motion? And please note those members will be leaving the council chamber for the duration of that item. So, are there any declarations of interest? Could I have a show of hands, please? Thank you. Have they been noted by officers? Was there enough time? I think maybe it was a bit too swift. Can we put your hands back up, please? So we have them all noted. Yes?
Point of order, I'm not leaving now. I've got an interest and I intend to vote. Why do I have to leave?
I'm going to put that question directly to the monitoring officer.
I mean, I've been elected to vote, so by the people of my ward, so I'm intending to vote. So.
Was this notified? Did you notify your party group leader about this previously? There have been some discussions about it.
No, but I'm planning to stay and vote. So.
Okay. Fortunately, we do have a little bit of time. Thank you for that notification now. We will have the rest of the meeting and we have the adjournment as well. If the monitoring officer wants to speak on it now, or do you want a bit of time to think about it and we come back with it?
Lord Mayor, advice has been provided generally to all councillors. I'm happy to pick up any specifics with individuals during the break, the adjournment before consideration of the Golden Motion as necessary. Ultimately, it is for individual councillors to determine, based on their own understanding of their personal circumstances, whether they have a disclosable pecuniary interest in the Golden Motion this afternoon. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay, well, let's see what happens. Have all the relevant parties been noted? Did you get those noted down? You might have started something. Yes, I know. I have a question on the floor. Councillor Massey?
Lord Mayor, there's also the issue of interest in the one of the later issues about the precept for the fire authority. So fire authority members need to declare an interest, and to speed things up, if I can just read you a list of the names, then they can be recorded, hopefully.
Be useful? Yes, thank you. Can you read them out?
Right. So it's Councillors Wilcox, Eddy, Goggin, Smith, Varney and myself. And I understand Councillor Ali, who would be in that list, is not here today.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Councillor Breckle,
yeah, thank you, my Lord Mayor. I just need to declare an interest on the Golden Motion, so I'll be absenting myself.
Hand up a few minutes ago.
I've only just got in, so
okay.
I apologise for being slightly late, my Lord Mayor.
Okay, no, that's fine. Sorry, I didn't notice you coming in. I wasn't trying to make a point. Absolutely. So add to the list. Thank you. Okay, that's normally one of the easiest items on the agenda, and it hasn't been today. Maybe the rest of the meeting will go more smoothly. So we're on now to minutes of the last meetings. We have actually got two sets of minutes before us today. I move that the minutes of the full council meeting and the extraordinary full council meeting, which was the one where we granted freedom of the city to the Bristol bus boycott organisers, which was held on the 13th of December, be agreed as a correct record. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Hans.
Seconded, my Lord Mayor.
Okay, so can I take it that the minutes are agreed? Aye, thank you. On to agenda item 5, which is the Lord Mayor's business. Council notes that Bristol resident Mike Alden has been honoured as the Unsung Hero Award at the 2022 Sports Personality of the Year. Mike founded the Knoll Park Football Club 10 years ago, and it supports 5 disability teams, veterans teams, girls teams and a boys team. I'm sure that Council would like to join me in congratulating Mike on his achievement and his many years' service in the community. I think Mike might be in the public gallery, I'm not sure. Fortunately, I didn't watch it, so... Very warm congratulations, Mike. So, we're now moving on to public forum. We have 30 minutes for this item, and it's split into two sections, 15 minutes for petitions and statements and 15 minutes for questions. Details of the petitions, statements and questions received have been published on our website. So first of all, I will go through the list, calling on those who have indicated that they planned to attend the meeting. Speakers are asked to pay attention to the traffic lights on the dais and to start to wrap up when the light turns amber. There were no public forum petitions received at this meeting. So we have a total of 23 public statements. A list will be displayed on the screen. 11 members of the public indicated that they planned to attend and to speak to their statements. They are displayed on the screen now, and I will run through those orders in the order that they received. I will invite each person to speak for 1 minute. Please summarise your statement and bear in mind that we have all read the statements, and so don't reread your statement out. Speak to us about what you want to say. So first of all, do we have Hayden Gill? Hayden.
Expanding permit parking will make this city a better place to live. Cities like Bath and Cardiff, with strong leadership, are expanding their permit parking. Why isn't Bristol? This administration is subsidising wealthy car owners from outside of Bristol. They can park their cars rent-free on our public land, and Bristol residents without cars are paying for this subsidy. This land could be trees, could be scooter parking, could be just extra space for buses and ambulances. Whilst property developers are paying for expanding permit parking zones, the Mayor vetoes their delivery. I'll end with poetry once again. There are many streets in Bristol. No permit, just park on double yellow. The cars live rent-free, a literal subsidy, and the Mayor keeps using his veto. Thank you.
Thank you. Very poetic, very much enjoyed it. Thank you. We now go to Liv Fortune, who's going to talk to us about austerity and libraries.
No libraries today, Lord Mayor. It amazes me that after 12 years of brutal Tory austerity, which is responsible for 300,000 excess deaths, still, as a society, we allow our politicians to rationalise an ideology which can only be described as murderous. People will die, there's no question about it. Cuts to services kill. Yet here we are, rationalising it. It's absolutely absurd. Now, I know that sometimes in politics it's necessary to compromise and to concede to ideals that might not be aligned with our own, but how can we stand by and rationalise something that kills people? This has got to stop. Bristol City Council, you need to stand up to central government and tell them you will not be cutting any services, and to fund Bristol City Council adequately so that you can fully deliver the services we pay tax for. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have Anne Hughes-Devereux? Who's going to talk about the Secretary of State letter. Anne?
Recent letters from the Secretary of State to Council leaders and MPs make it clear that he will uphold refusal of developments that are not sustainable, unpopular, unhealthy or ugly. Also that housing targets should never be used to excuse such developments. Planning committees are encouraged to reject developments that are on green belt land, have a high risk, flood risk, or that damage the environment. Also to reject high-rise developments in low-rise neighbourhoods or those lacking community support. Planning inspectors have been instructed similarly. We request that the Planning Committee members apply these principles and reject proposals that lack community support, harm our green spaces or adversely affect the character of a neighbourhood. We hope our elected representatives will protect our communities and environment and not the profits of irresponsible developers.
Thank you for your statement. Very well timed. We now have Professor John Tarleton.
Hello, thank you. There is a loophole in the way planning policy is currently applied, which is being ruthlessly exploited by developers. Policy states that if trees have been felled as part of a development, these must be replaced with new tree planting aimed at maintaining the tree canopy. Instead, planning officers are allowing developers to effectively pay a fee to the council with no expectation that the promised trees will actually be planted, as there is nowhere to plant them. The total accumulated funds for tree replacement across Bristol stands at £845,000. The city centre area alone has unspent tree replacement funds of £167,000, and for the area that includes the harbour side, this stands at £74,000. Trees are essential for the climate resilience of our city centre. Without them, whole areas will become unlivable. Therefore, there should be an immediate moratorium on any developments where trees will be felled and the exact location of any replacement trees cannot be identified. If lost tree canopy cannot be replaced, the development is by definition unsustainable and should be rejected. To do otherwise is contrary to local and national policies and recent pronouncements by the Secretary of State.
Thank you for your statement. We now have Jill Tarleton. I'd say leave the microphone where it is. Thank you. Yes.
Our city centre trees are crucial for Bristol's climate resilience. They can reduce the temperature of heat waves by 10 degrees, help prevent flooding and reduce pollution. So developments in the city centre that decrease tree canopy are not sustainable and should be rejected. Local and national policies support such decisions, and the Secretary of State recently confirmed he will uphold such rejections. Do not be fooled by claims that trees will be replaced in the city centre. This is not true, as there is nowhere to plant them. Because trees play such an essential part in climate resilience, it is inexplicable why trees are not mentioned at all in the Climate Emergency Action Plan. We are not saying the Council is anti-tree, but they do seem to be prepared to allow our city centres to become a treeless wasteland. Trees in our city centre should be given greater protection, and developments are not sustainable if they result in an overall decrease in our tree cover.
Thank you very much. Do we have Susan Hackett?
4th of February 2020, Bristol's Mayor declares an ecological emergency. Let's remind ourselves, emergency is a highly serious situation that requires urgent action. It is most certainly not business as usual. This emergency where we are each and all caught up in, where we desperately need to immediately preserve and protect the green world already in existence here in Bristol. Baltic Wharf is not registered as a brownfield site. Clearly it is greenfield. Let's be alive to that which is precious to our survival. Trees. Trees and humans stand and will fall together. Bristol City Council, I urge you to act urgently to ensure the green this city has remains so before it is too late. Planting saplings in suburbs can never ever do what our mature inner city trees are doing now and already. Our mature Baltic wolf trees just cannot be sacrificed for a dangerous, reckless plan to build high-rise luxury apartments in a level 3 flood zone.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We now have a question, a statement from David Redgewell. David, is that?
Thank you.
Oh, I did, yes, I beg your pardon. Christina Biggs, yes. Sorry. 1,000 apologies. Come back to you in a minute, David.
In November 2022, the Clean Air Zone was finally started. I'm from the Bristol Clean Air Alliance, that we've been trying to encourage the council to implement a zone that actually makes a difference rather than just complying with the kind of barely legal limit. Just to remind you, of course, the 300 deaths limit figure is notional. in the calculation to produce it is using the levels of NO2 and particulates we know about. So it is a scientifically based value. It's not actual 300 deaths, but it's scientifically based. But in our statement, we've put out the asthma map, which is far more immediate as a problem because it's junior young people being taken to hospital because of an asthma attack. So I'd like to remind people that the Clean Air Zone is there for a public health purpose. We understand there's a petition against it. We're just please give it a chance. Please don't pay to pollute. Please use the metro bus and the rail services that were put in. Half-hour service went in last year. But let's treat our city centre not like a sewer, air sewer, but as a resource that young people need to breathe when they're at school. We understand that schools were not reporting the amount of asthma because they were worried about parents taking away. This is a serious problem.
Okay.
Let's stick to the Clean Air Zone. Thank you.
Thank you. You got a bit of extra time there because I'd missed you out, so it all works out in the end. Back to David.
Thank you. Well, I think I'm here today on what is, I think, quite an historic day, really. Some people might not think that. But actually, this is the first move towards setting up a regional transport authority. Something some of us have campaigned for 21 years. Martin Garrett's in the audience as well with TFGB. Every transport user group and transport trade union, I'm not talking about your trade unions, transport trade unions, support the setting up of a passenger transport executive for the greater Bristol and Bath City region. But we are desperate at the moment, working closely with Mayor Norris, to find staff. We don't have the staff to deliver the Henbury Loop, to deliver the bus service plans and networks. We need to be able to deliver the city regional transport policy, and we need to be able to deliver a better public transport. No, to Manchester. Manchester does not have transport staff, Manchester City Council, nor does Birmingham. They're all with the combined authority. We need to move forward, make progress, and get the staff across to the West of England Mirror Combined Authority as soon as possible. And it's an authority, not an agency or a private agency. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Do we have Leslie Powell? Yes. Your statement's on parks.
As a volunteer in Redcatch Park, the community garden and the Northern Slopes, I know that the proposed cuts to the parks budget will impact on us volunteer groups more than ever. To support our voluntary work, there are elements that we cannot progress without the council's support. The delays in getting the support most of the time are beyond frustrating. What is incredible is that the transfer of council-owned assets to willing volunteer groups, which would reduce costs, drag on for years. Both CATs concerning Redcatch Park have taken years so far and are still not concluded. There is a general lack of communication, no flow of crucial information to inform the process, and no acknowledgement that the viability of the garden and the football club are in jeopardy because of this. Meanwhile, some of these assets have become obsolete, whilst costs to rectify have escalated. We need pressure from the Mayor to get the CATs concluded, as the licence for the community garden failed to be renewed by December 23rd. The garden is now in perilous position of refunding applications. Can we have an urgent meeting of all interested parties to discuss?
Thank you. Do we have Catherine with us? Catherine? Yes, over there.
Thank you. I recognise that Bristol City Council has declared an ecological and climate emergency, and it appears some changes have been made to the local plan to start on the Herculean task to reverse a catastrophic effect of our species decline. However, the passing of the outline planning permission to Ashton Vale, which flew firmly in the face of the golden motion previously passed by full council, reflects you as a council have far to go. We have to recognise we cannot continue to build and develop on precious green spaces within our city without further serious harm to nature and wildlife. We have so many empty shops and underutilised buildings in the city that developers are not attracted to, as greenfield sites are easier and cheaper. You councillors are the last and the only line of defence Bristol nature has. Be on the correct side of history and say you did everything you could for biodiversity, and hope against hope that our grandchildren and their children live to see bumblebees and butterflies.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Do we have Anita Bennett? Green Spaces.
Won't repeat what was in my statement already, but just to remind people that we had over 5,000 people supporting the petition to use only the NPPR definition of brownfield, and that does not include Baltic Wharf with 1 toilet block and 101 mature trees and hedgerows. So how is it even possible to entertain building on floodland? I trust that us ratepayers will not be paying any money for the appeal that Gorham Homes, owned by the council, might be making to the Secretary of State when he might reject, and the planning committee might reject, this planning application for Baltic Wharf. And on the tree replacement loophole, I certainly hope that we're going to follow up from what John Tarleton said and close this loophole. It's nothing but bribe money being spent for trees that cannot be replanted nearby because there is no space. This is true for Baltic Wharf. It's certainly true for St. Christopher's School with 38 mature trees. So now that there's about 750k sitting in the bank, unspent, that can't be spent because there's nowhere to plant it, why not use that money to dedicate to special needs children in need of special school placements? Money is desperately needed. That's where we need to put it.
Thank you. Sorry, Mike Alden. He's got the microphone. Thank you.
I'm Mike Alden, and I run a partner football club. As you may know, I recently won the BBC Unsung Hero Award. I was very surprised and honoured to get the award, and I am grateful to have been nominated. I've had a lot of support over the years from the Park Centre, and without their help, I would have been unable to get the club to where it is today.
Mike, can you hold the microphone a bit closer because people can't hear you? Thank you.
I've had a lot of support from the Park Centre over the years, and without their help, would not be able to get the club to where it is today. But we are desperately trying to create proper changing facilities to accommodate the girls and disability teams at Redcatch Park. At the club, we try to say that nobody gets turned away, but the truth is more girls and disability players want to play, but we just cannot accommodate them or invite away teams to come and play. If we get the community asset transfer for a pavilion building in Redcatch Park, then we can resolve this and more children and people with disabilities and players will benefit. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Do we have Martin Garrett? Martin?
We support the move of transport staff to a West of England Transport Authority with North Somerset. Local rail, a new urban tram system, bus operations, bus priority, and agreed road hierarchy need integration with each other. livable neighbourhoods depend on a shift to integrated public transport. This needs to be planned and administered by a combined authority, as in most metropolitan regions in England. Transport is responsible for some 25% of carbon emissions. A reduction cannot be achieved by local active travel alone. Integrated public transport also promotes social justice and opportunity for all. Thank you.
Thank you. Final statement is from Brendan Murphy on road usage for hospitality.
84 days have now passed since road usage for hospitality was discussed at the full council meeting on the 18th of October. All parties during the debate expressed an interest in helping the independent hospitality businesses, and we were informed that 1, detailed guidance will be provided, 2, no enforcement action will take place against venues going through planning application, and 3, a table and chairs cross-party group will be formed to come up with solutions. Today, no detailed guidance has been provided, and enforcement action has been threatened multiple times, and tomorrow, the 11th of January 2023, is the date venues must have structures removed or face huge bills from the ever more profitable council enforcement team friends. Why have we been lied to? We know the council is understaffed, but having agreed that this action would not be taken, it is clear that a deliberate political decision has been made in favour of the council's safest and easiest course of action, rather than what communities would prefer or what would benefit our city as a whole. The council has the power to enable these venues to continue to operate by running TROs and other methods of consultation. How many more businesses need to go bust before this administration wakes up? A little less conversation, a lot more action, please.
Thank you. That's the end of the statements, and we'll now move to public questions. The questions received have been published on the website and are shared now on the screen. 13 questions were received from 8 members of the public. 7 of those have indicated that they wish to attend. We will try to cover as many questions as possible in 15 minutes. It may not be possible for everyone to speak, so we ask for your patience as we run through the questions in order. When I call on you, please read your question out and we will try to show the question on the screen. The Deputy Mayor will then reply verbally. Following the response from the Deputy Mayor, you will be invited to ask a supplementary question. Thank you. Francesca from St Christopher's Action Network, please, can you ask your question?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. This is a question relating to St Christopher's, a much valued school in Westbury Park that looked after and educated many of Bristol's children with complex special needs. It's been described as one of a kind and a beacon of hope by families whose children thrived in the unique environment. It finally closed its doors in 2020. Now the site has been bought up by developers who want to build a huge luxury retirement complex. In a clear pre-application guidance, Bristol City Council explained to the developers that, quote,
can I just ask you to move to your question? So
yeah, okay.
It's supposed to be a question. That's a very long preamble.
We want to clarify about the consultation that developers claim is happening between the community and between them and Bristol City Council. So can you please tell us, firstly, which special education needs experts or council departments are involved in discussing the replacement SEND provision to go on site? And secondly, what is the exact nature of the provision that is being discussed or offered? Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Craig.
Yeah, thank you. As it happens, my auntie used to be the treasurer of St Christopher's once upon a time, so I am well aware of how that facility is perceived and what it has done over the years. For context, obviously, it was an independent school and was closed and the provision ended and wasn't maintained by the council. As you'll note, the developer is primarily focused on retirement living and not on directly replacing specialist SEND provision. Our own plans for the 450 additional SEND school places focuses on alternative sites, and this isn't one of those that's included within that plan. That said, the Specialist Places team and the Educational Capital team have been engaged with the developer about some small provision, but we have no plans that rely on it.
Hang on just a second there, just let me get my head around this. So the speaker is Francesca. So I think it's probably best if we just continue with that.
Okay, yeah, sorry, we're both representing St Christopher's Action Network, so Yeah. Okay, thank you for that. That's really useful to know. Are there any more details you can give us about what you would like to see on site as part of these consultations?
Is that your supplementary question then?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not my portfolio, I suppose, but at this moment in time, I think we're too early to come to that. As it stands, it's not within our plans to deliver the additional SEND provision that we need for the city. But if an opportunity arises, we will, of course, take advantage of it. So we're at the point of understanding where in the mix it would fit, if it could fit. In terms of actual details, we're nowhere near that level of detail yet.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. So I just thought I'd better stick to the rules with one person speaking. Do we have Hayden? We still have Hayden? Yes, you've got two questions, actually. First question's on Feeder Road. So,
bit of a specific question on this sort of stretch of Feeder Road where the pavement is less than a metre wide. People are walking on the road just to pass each other. And right by the other side of the road, you've got 2 metres of just parking for free. So the question is, are parked cars on Feeder Road 4 times more important than people walking?
So Feeder Road is part of the Temple Quarter regeneration area. A consultation actually started today on that, on the whole area actually, including the principles for the changes in those areas. So this includes what travel infrastructure and public realm improvements could be needed in the area to support the homes, the jobs and the public spaces that we overall aim to deliver there. The consultation is open until Wednesday the 8th of March, and I would encourage everyone with an interest to visit the website. It's bristol.gov.uk/Temple Quarter consultation. There is also an interactive map where you can put specific comments against specific locations, so you could very specifically identify the area you've just talked about, and will help us in our master planning for St Philip's Marsh next year. Through that master planning work, opportunities for improving pedestrian safety will be considered. The Feeder Road and the canal are identified as important transport routes through the area, and the framework suggests improvements to public realm, active travel and public transport infrastructure.
Thank you. Do you have a supplementary on that?
Yeah, are parked cars 4 times more important than people?
Well, no, they're not, no.
Do you want? Yes. Yeah. Glad to hear that. Do you have your second question?
Yeah, I think the second one,
which is about heat networks.
Yeah, district heating network. So currently the draft order, I've commented on it, but the site has to be reinstated to the condition it was before. So I was wondering if you have any plans at all to work with your sustainable and active travel and transport teams before they move over to redesign the streets before they're dug up for the heat network. So afterwards we have a better public realm rather than just whatever was left before.
Yeah, I'm going to hand over to Councillor Beach to answer this one, if that's okay, as planning is her remit. Is that right?
The short answer is yes. Have you got a supplementary, or I can elaborate? I don't.
Further details, yeah, elaborate, yeah.
So in practice, if you think about where the heat network's going to go, so the development order is out for consultation, so please do feedback on that. In practice, the heat network is going to largely focus on those areas that are mainly the areas of growth and regeneration, if you consider where the heat network will actually go in practice. My advice is that you get involved in those consultations that are taking place, because you're absolutely right, it is a great opportunity. Well, you know, the dig up the road once mentality. We already look at obviously putting fibre in the ground at the same time as the heat network. It's a great suggestion. It is something we're doing. Ian Pond at Bristol Cycling is stitched into the regeneration projects that we're working on. And so please do get involved. Thank you for the suggestion.
Thank you, Hayden. Back to Liv. You've got a question on public services. Question number 3.
My question is, how can you go along with cuts to services in the knowledge that austerity has already claimed 300,000 lives? And that's probably a conservative estimate.
Yeah, thanks, Liv. I mean, we've talked about this back and forth for the past probably 7 or 8 years, and you'll know that we don't support austerity by any stretch of the imagination. We are aware of the impacts and the cumulative impacts of years and years that cuts have had on public services and on people's lives. Therefore, we continue to fight to protect services as best we can. We are required, of course, to set a balanced budget. There's no amount of of posturing that stops us from doing that. And actually, if we were to not set a balanced budget, commissioners would be introduced. The first thing they would do would be to wipe out all discretionary spend. So that would be things like the council tax reduction scheme, money that we spend on people in adults and children's social care upstream of the statutory responsibility. There are a huge range of things that we do that we have been fighting to protect and continue to fight to protect, but it's very difficult. We still need to set that balanced budget. We've put forward a consultation on a range of options for the next budget. We will set a balanced budget as we're obliged to do.
Do you have a supplementary, Liv?
Yeah, I do. So, I mean, it basically sounds like you're justifying it. You're going along with what central governments say. How many lives do you think are necessary to lose before you're satisfied, and central government are satisfied that enough cuts and enough savings have been made? How many lives do you think need to be sacrificed?
So I think that's a horrendously unfair question, because I am not sacrificing lives, and I've never sacrificed lives. Right? I am delivering a balanced budget that we are legally obliged to do as a city in order to deliver and protect the most vulnerable in the city as best we can. We continue to do that, and we do that within the context of which we're allowed. Your questions are really to be addressed to central government, not to us.
Well, you're local politicians, so this is my port of call. I think it's you that needs to address central government, not me.
You've had your supplementary question. Thank you. Sian Ellis-Thomas.
Hi again. Everyone knows Mike Alden, who's here with us today. My question is about the park pavilion cat transfer. The club is desperate for better facilities to enable it to properly accommodate the girls and disability teams. It currently cannot play these teams at the park or welcome their away team competitors because the facilities don't comply with basic legal requirements. Without them, Mike cannot grow these two much needed elements of the club and may actually have to turn away players.
Can I ask you to get to the question, please?
My question is, can the Mayor please explain why, almost after 2 years, the application for this community asset transfer for the pavilion has not been progressed?
Yeah, thank you. Firstly, can I echo the Lord Mayor's sentiments and congratulate Mike on his award and the work that he does in the community, which is all brilliant. We have been actively progressing community asset transfers and did carry the first paper in October 2020 to introduce sports assets transfers, which was a kind of specific and new area for asset transfer. But it is a difficult situation, and it does really emphasise the difficult position that our parks team are in at the moment. Several clubs across the city share the frustration, and we appreciate you bringing it here to raise. This has provided for sports clubs to manage their own pitch and surrounds, take over their club houses and seek external investment for sustainable futures rather than be subject to diminishing investment from us. The process was applied to every sports ground in the city and with pitches, and we received the expression of interest from many of our parks. As previously mentioned, progress of this was delayed by the lack of resource and funding during the pandemic. We are committed to completing the work this year, and everyone who has submitted an expression of interest will be able to submit a business case, and we can take the sports asset transfers forward. So we're committing to it this year.
Thank you. Do you have a supplementary question, Sian?
What is actively being done to move this particular cat forward, and when can we expect a result or a meeting to discuss?
I mean, that's not something I can answer now. I don't have that detail with me, but there are a range of sports asset transfers going through the process at the moment, and community asset transfers too. And we are prioritising. We are recruiting 2 new staff to help deliver on the sports asset transfers specifically. So we will have more capacity to deal with it for this year coming.
Thank you. Do you have Samantha Benstead? Samantha? Your question on unanswered complaints.
Yeah, my question relates to 3 complaints that were raised with Bristol City Council on behalf of a vulnerable young black man that were never responded to. Can you explain how this could happen? Firstly, how the complaint system seems to work for some and not for others. And secondly, what impact do you think this might have on a marginalised young black man identified as being vulnerable to exploitation?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, so in terms of this specific case, the Mayor's office did chase this up last week. We understand that responses were provided to the complaint. That said, we would expect all complaints to be responded to. So where we have instances where that hasn't happened, we will, of course, carry out all the investigations and do the necessary kind of corrective work that needs to be done afterwards. Yeah, I mean, we agree it's not acceptable for complaints to be unanswered. We are looking into this specific case, which we're aware of.
Do you have a supplementary?
Yeah, can you provide us with evidence that these complaints were responded to? 1 2015, no response was received at all. 1 2019, no response was received at all. 1 2022, we were told for 9 months it was being investigated, only to being told after 9 months it wasn't. Raised to the Ombudsman, who sent it back So yes, after 7 years, we've had a stage 1 response to one of those complaints. The money awarded by the Ombudsman hasn't been paid.
I need to hear a question in this.
So where is the evidence that these complaints were responded to? Where is that?
Yeah, I mean,
seen it.
obviously I don't have that here, and I can only share that with the complainant themselves. But we're more than happy to provide that. Yeah.
Unfortunately, that's the end of the public forum allotted time. So we're going to move on. But I would just like to let members in the public know that there will be an adjournment in the meeting at about 3:45. So we'd invite you to stay. You're very welcome to stay until then. We've got now agenda item 7, which is petitions notified by councillors. There are 2 petitions notified by councillors, and each of them have 1 minute to speak. So first of all, we've got Councillor Gary Hopkins, who's talking about a petition on parks funding. You have 1 minute, Gary.
Yeah, we can all see that parks are going to be severely under pressure. Some years ago, councillors in Windmill Hill and Knoll, supported by councillors in Filwood, made a decision to sell a small part of land, with the promise that 100% of the funds will be available for park spending, and most of those funds locally. Now, that agreement was honoured until the present mayor decided to dishonour that agreement and is saying that that money will not now be available for local parks. So over the years, as an example in Redcatch Park, we've put in, at no cost to the council, new tennis courts, mugas, all sorts of improvements. We now do not have the money that we'd carefully set aside to repaint the lines on the tennis courts or to put the new nets up. What a ridiculous situation. This council needs to get its act together. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hopkins. Okay, we have a second council petition today, and that's from Councillor Tim Rippington. His petition, Stop the Cuts to Brislington Buses. You have 1 minute, Tim.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I originally raised this petition in October last year in response to proposed cuts to the 36 bus in Brislington. Petition gathered 529 online signatures and a further 43 paper signatures in just a couple of weeks. I did not present the petition at the time, as last-minute negotiations were going on with WECA to try to fill the gap left by the cuts to this route. However, this replacement service has proved to be of no use whatsoever, running only once every 2 hours and in a circular fashion, so if you do manage to catch the bus in one direction, you can't get back. I'm therefore presenting it now and call on the Mayor, Cabinet Member and officers to help make representations to both WECA and First Bus for this service to be reinstated as soon as enough drivers become available. The residents of Brislington deserve a better bus service. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, on to agenda item 8, which is a petition debate. The title of this petition is No More Building on Green Spaces in the City of Bristol. The petition has reached the 3,500 signature threshold to qualify for a full council debate. 20 minutes is the maximum time allowed for this item. The petition organiser will be permitted, in this occasion today, 7 minutes to present the petition and its objectives. That's because we're making reasonable adjustments. So we will then, after that initial proposal, we will then proceed to a council debate. I'll also ask the Deputy Mayor or the relevant Cabinet Member to respond at the end of the debate. As a reminder, this is not an interactive discussion involving the public. The issues raised in the petition and the comments of the members during the debate will be referred to the Mayor and to the relevant Cabinet Member for a written response. The petition organiser is Nazim Dumont, or Dumont. Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Hello, hi. No More Building on Green Spaces, presented by myself, Nazim Dumont, on behalf of Martin Cordy. In February 2020, Bristol City Council declared an ecological emergency in response to escalating threats to wildlife and ecosystem. We are thankful for the vote in favour of the Golden Motion passed by councillors in September 2021. However, we are still witnessing the potential loss of Brazilian meadows and other green spaces. Even Nova's Hill is still under threat with the application from a private developer. It's an absolute travesty that we are seeing highly biodiverse and ecologically important green spaces potentially destroyed. One has to ask how so many of our beloved green spaces, including sites of conservation interest, even made it into the local plan in the first place. Furthermore, Bristol City Council needs to genuinely listen to residents. Decisions are often seemingly already made, and the consultation with the public merely a tick box exercise. There have been too many instances where views and concerns arising from supposed public consultations have been completely ignored. We do not deny that the City of Bristol has a housing crisis of sorts. This petition is asking to prioritise brownfield sites. But let us carefully look at the definition of what has become known as a housing crisis, which is so often used to justify relentless building on green spaces. It would be fairer to say that we have a housing affordability crisis, and no amount of new housing development is going to bring down property prices or rent. And why do we have a lack of social housing? Could it be attributed to the current right to buy scheme, which enabled tenants to purchase a property at a considerable discount after being tenants for only a few years? We call for the overwhelming support for the Golden Motion and the content of this petition to be prioritised urgently with a review of the local plan. The local plan should exist to protect valuable green spaces and not allow developers to destroy them to increase their profits. They can still make profits by redeveloping brownfield sites. This would be recycling. The Mayor's Climate Action Plan of 2019 made a pledge to make the city carbon neutral by 2030. Green spaces store many tons of carbon. When a green space is distributed, when green space is disturbed, all this carbon is released into the atmosphere. We need to ask, how can continually building on green spaces possibly support the pledge to make the city carbon neutral by 2030 when this adds to existing carbon emissions? We also need to ask how developers can make any claim that a biodiversity net gain can be achieved when a green space has its habitat destroyed, ancient hedgerows ripped up, and oxygen-giving greenery is removed. We urge councillors to show a commitment in the first instance by removing all green spaces from the local plan, including the proposed development at Longmoor. This particular scheme would send out a message that developers are allowed to destroy wildlife habitat by promising to fund a commercial venture in a nearby neighbourhood. We urge Bristol City Council to do the utmost to protect valuable green spaces by committing to the following. Remove all green spaces from the local plan and in all future reviews. Ensure that developers prioritise brownfield sites and repurpose disused buildings. Ensure that all future developments are either affordable or social housing. Uphold the pledge for the city to become carbon neutral by not building on green spaces, and lobby for a change in criteria regarding the right to buy scheme. The opportunity to take steps can begin today in this chamber. Bristol City Council was the first to declare a climate emergency. It was also the first to declare an ecological emergency. Here is a chance to Bristol councillors to unite and set yet another example to the rest of the United Kingdom by making Bristol the first city in the United Kingdom to declare no more building on green spaces. Thank you.
Thank you, Nazim. Thank you. I'd like now to call on Councillor Nicola Beach to speak on behalf of the Labour Group. Nicola.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the petitioners for continuing to raise this important debate about planning our city's future and the importance of our green spaces. As you might imagine, where and how we deliver over the next 15 years is an incredibly hot topic in the local plan working group, who are made up of members that are in the chamber this evening. It's great to see the petition acknowledge the work that has taken place in Bristol in recent years with both the climate and ecological declarations. Since that declaration, I've continued to keep a close relationship on the actions of the ecological emergency in particular, ranging from water quality, weaning Bristol off our pesticides, and land managed better for nature. But I make no apologies here for teaching grandma to suck eggs for the next few moments, if you can bear with me. We must look up and out, upstream to central government policy, which is at the heart of this challenge for the city and all cities in this country. The flip-flop on government planning reform may, it appears, have taken its final flip in recent weeks. But for people who are watching that closely, and I hope the petitioners behind this petition are, you will see that that 35% uplift remains in government policy on the top cities in the UK. That is what drives those challenging and difficult discussions that every member of the local plan working group has to front up to at most of those sessions, and I'm sure people will echo that tonight in this petition debate. Please work with us, campaign with us on these flawed government policies around growth, pushing homes into cities because they're terrified of the home counties is no way to run this country's growth trajectory, and that is my ask back to petitioners to join me on that. Meanwhile, back in Bristol, the local plan working group's role with that devolved responsibility into this chamber is to set that direction for Bristol. How do we responsibly, ethically and sustainably grow Bristol for the next 15 years? But we must take an informed judgment about where we develop Bristol, and that involves data-driven, evidence-based approaches to growth for those much-needed homes, employment spaces that our city's children will need. That involves separating the precious from the not precious, the brownfield from the contaminated, the at-risk of flooding from the not at risk of flooding, developing strategies for the River Avon to resolve that. None of these are easy challenges. That involves unpicking government policy around what building beautiful actually means in practice. And so please get involved. I really hope petitioners have taken part in the consultation. Come and talk to the working group. You know, there's an open invitation to engage members across this chamber. We have a really positive culture in the local plan working group. We want to continue to work with the city on that. Please get involved, please get in touch. Thank you for the petition. I really support what you're talking about. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I'd like to turn to Councillor Tessa Fitzjohn to speak on behalf of the Green Group.
Congratulations on a very successful petition, rightly close to the hearts of Bristol residents. Of course, the Green Party supports protecting green space. We are the only political party in the UK that can honestly declare a genuine commitment to addressing the ecological emergency. It was Green Councillor Carla Denyer who secured Bristol's commitment in 2018 to the climate emergency, now included by many other local authorities. The Council need to support the principle behind this petition and take the ecological emergency more seriously. Our lives and our planet depend upon it. We now know the UK is the most depleted nation in the world for loss of wildlife habitat and biodiversity. We know the health of our soil and the insects that pollinate our crops are essential to our survival. But it's not just wildlife we lose when we remove the green spaces from our cities. We lose the benefit of the mental and physical health. In lockdown, people found walking in the park, gardening and working an allotment an important lifeline to good health. There is also the uncounted value to our green spaces. So this petition begs the question, what else do we need to protect? Greenbelt was created to stop urban sprawl, a cut-off point. Is that enough? No, we urgently need green corridors in and out of the city, connecting up front and back gardens, verges and pocket parks, as well as larger spaces like Northern Slopes and Brislington Meadows to provide essential havens for wildlife. Greening up our cities is the long game. Not only does land need protecting, we need to lower our city lights and provide safe travel for migrating birds and roosting bats. So what of this housing crisis? It's true, we don't have enough houses, but it's just as important Bristol has enough of the right type of houses. Not just housing for students or one-bed flats for homes, but homes for families. Bristol desperately needs genuinely affordable and social rent housing to address the affordability crisis and provide homes for local people. I urge Council to support this petition and commit to taking a hard look at the local plan. I sit on the local plan group to ensure that our housing is in the right place and of the right type for our residents, not offshore investors, and leave our green spaces alone. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fitzjohn. Can I now call on Councillor Eddy, please, to speak on behalf of the Conservative Group?
Lord Mayor, firstly, may I congratulate the petition organisers for raising over 700 signatures in this cold, dreary winter. That was no mean feat, so well done. Secondly, may I thank them for giving impetus to the automation on the city's green spaces, supported by all sides just over a year ago. It was always the case that the real donkey work required by the motion would need to be done by the cross-party local plan working group, which Councillor Beach has detailed. The revised draft local plan document is currently out for consultation, and I urge Bristolians to respond to this by the deadline of the 20th of January. The three locations explicitly referred to in my motion, land near Yew Tree Farm, the undeveloped Western Slopes and Brislington Meadows, are all recommended not to be developed for housing, but the petitioners are correct. The threat remains, particularly over Brislington Meadows. Thirdly, the campaign unleashed by the Gorda motion was boosted 2 full councils ago when every councillor present supported a motion calling for new evidence-led realistic local housing targets. Before Christmas, the government responded positively and announced the end of centralised mandatory housing targets, the cessation of damaging land banking, and new powers for local authorities to prioritise brownfield development over green space development. The petition is absolutely right to highlight the need to protect, and I quote, highly biodiverse and ecologically important, unquote, urban green spaces. The local plan working group recognised this when they considered, for example, whether Yew Tree Farm, the undeveloped Western Slopes or Brislington Meadows should be zoned for housing or not. However, my group believes it is important that the council and the people we serve realise that Bristol is a tight urban authority and may be forced to look at meeting our crying housing needs by considering less ecologically important green spaces. As I said at the DCA committee in October of last year, to do otherwise would be craven and dishonest. I do not believe this chamber is that.
Thank you, Councillor Eddy. I'd now like to call on Councillor Andrew Varney to speak on behalf of the Liberal Democrat Group.
Thank you, my Lord Mayor. And can I also add my congratulations to Martin Cordy and Nazim for bringing this petition to full council today. My Lord Mayor, it is a debate that almost didn't happen. Mr Cordy felt that an email sent to him from the Mayor's office appeared to discourage him from bringing this petition to full council, claiming we had already had petitions and motions on similar topics in recent months. I am pleased I was able to persuade Mr Cordy to ignore the Mayor and speak directly to Democratic Services, thereby ensuring that the debate took place and thousands of concerned residents would have their voices heard, something I believe is very important. And the fact of the matter is, despite motions and petitions on this topic in recent months, our precious green spaces are still at risk. In the latest draft version of the Bristol local plan, a huge area of greenbelt land, 39 acres in fact, is set to be lost in my ward of Brislington West alone. Developers are already lining up to concrete over these green fields that separate Bristol from Keynsham. In fact, one developer has even proceeded to illegally chop down acres of mature woodland in anticipation of permission being granted to develop this site. My Lord Mayor, it is pretty galling to local residents that such disgraceful behaviour will seemingly be rewarded with planning permission to develop land that a dodgy developer has damaged. And if we are not careful, we run the risk of continuous urban sprawl from Bristol to Keynsham. Of course, we must have development, and I welcome development, and I wish to stress my very clear support for several developments in my ward of Brislington West, which will deliver thousands of new homes in the coming years. These include the Totterdown Bridge development, Paintworks Phase 4, the Vistry development on Bath Road, Castle Court, John Peer and Flowers Hill. What do all these developments have in common? They are all on brownfield sites. I believe in a brownfield first approach development, and I believe other members in this chamber feel the same. However, by including greenfield sites in the draft local plan, there is no way to ensure this approach can happen. It is pretty obvious that developers will try to build on our greenfield sites first, as they are less problematic and less expensive than brownfield sites. We need to find a way to make sure that our brownfield sites are developed first, and I would suggest that the best way to do this is to remove all greenfield sites from the current local plan. Bristol has led the way with climate and ecological emergency declarations. Let's ensure that these declarations are not empty promises by finding a way to ensure brownfield first development and protecting our precious green spaces for future generations. My Lord Mayor, can I also ask that the Mayor shows respect to the thousands of people who have signed this petition by providing them with a proper response? A blog on social media is not acceptable. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Varney. Can I now ask Councillor Gary Hopkins to speak on behalf of the Knoll Community Party?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I think that we have to look at how we best balance the need for more housing, which is absolutely definitely there, and the absolute priority of protecting our open spaces. Sometimes this has been fudged in the past, and that's not acceptable. The caravan park is not a brownfield site. It is absolutely ridiculous that the administration actually looked at that. We have to make certain, therefore, that when we have opportunities for brownfield development, that we take full advantage of them, because otherwise we will be sprawling out everywhere into green belt or into other green sites within the city. Councillor Varney mentioned a couple of areas in his ward that are brownfield development. We have one that's coming up for approval in the very near future, which is an old shopping centre which needs to be redeveloped, desperately needs regeneration. Not one blade of grass will be lost if that is redeveloped. We will gain green roofs, we will gain pocket parks, and we will gain trees. So no greenery lost, but a fair amount actually produced. And if we can persuade more people around the city to take that positive approach and actually produce improvements rather than just trying to grab the easiest development site, which is a green field, then I think that we would be in much better shape. Northern Slopes, which is mentioned on here, is in our ward, and we know how absolutely vital and important that is to public mental health for people in our area. So please support this petition, but at the same time, we need to go further, and we need to make certain that we maximise the opportunities when they are there, so that the prospect of moving on to green space is actually diminished. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Hopkins. That is the end of the debate, and I would now like to refer to Councillor Nicola Beach as the Cabinet Member to see if she'd like to respond. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. And I will just very briefly respond. I mean, just again to reiterate the thanks for keeping this item on the agenda. I don't think it would have dropped off anyway, but it is still really useful to bring that debate here tonight. You know, I think I will just talk for a second about what I've just listened to in the debate. You know, the local plan, interestingly, does play into the future governance of this city council, right? So we have gone, this is not a mayoral role, this is a cross-party working group, full council decision that this chamber will take in the coming months. I think it's absolutely critical for petitioners, anyone in the public gallery, to really just hold some of the discussion that we have just heard in this chamber You know, leadership involves leading. There are no passengers on the local plan working group, Tessa. So some of the narrative that you gave then does not represent the consultation that we have put out, and it does not represent the shared decision that we took together in recent months. The best thing about the local plan is it's there in black and white. The consultation is still open. You can go and look at that. So when Mr Hopkins, who isn't, and his party, to be fair, is not represented on the working group, as it is 2 people, you know, sprawling out everywhere, this kind of emotive language does not represent the local plan that is currently under consultation. We're working so hard with Baines around preventing the coalescence that Varney inaccurately just described. Andrew Brown, a fantastic asset to the local plan working group. Please take your message back to your group, because this is a collective responsibility. The local plan is a shared document this entire chamber is working on together. So I think what's really great, the petition is brilliant. Thank you very much for that. Please come and talk to the working group, but there are no passengers on that working group. Every single member in this chamber is working together through their membership, and we will bring this local plan forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, okay. So now I ask Council to note the issues raised in the petition together with the comments of members during the debate at the meeting. The matter will now be referred to the Mayor, and if I may, I'd like to refer to Craig just to speak a little bit about what Andrew said about written responses and how we're going to manage things going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's been some confusion that seems to have upset people, and I think unnecessarily. So the previous petition we responded to with a blog, but we also emailed that directly to the petitioners to explain that we'd responded on the blog. Part of the reason for responding via the blog is to increase transparency of the response. We had a question, we didn't get to it actually, but from Suzanne in the audience about how we reduce the number of FOIs we receive. One of the ways we do that is by publishing our responses to things rather than just submitting them via email directly to people. So it's not an intention to kind of undermine the process. The intention was to make sure that the response was transparent and was also emailed directly. We could have cut and pasted the words into an email separately, but that would have delivered the same outcome. So the commitment is, from now on, the Democratic Services will email the written response to the petition leader, and then that will be published. And I think that's the correct way to do things. Thank you, Craig. Okay, so moving on now to agenda item number 9, which is the council tax base for 23-24. I'd like to call on Councillor Craig Cheney to double up, to move the report, and then respond to the report. No. Thank you. Yeah, I don't know if I'll respond as well. Life's short. So thank you. This report recommends for approval by Council the council tax base for the next financial year. It sets out the number of properties that are forecast to pay council tax next year after taking into account those that aren't required to pay. This includes households that are exempt or receive discounts to their council tax bills under national rules, such as students and single occupiers. In addition, although seeing a general reduction in claimants, particularly those of working age, we are continuing to help over 33,000 low-income households through the local council tax reduction scheme. Bristol, like many cities, has seen collection rates falling during the pandemic, with a slow recovery to date. Consequently, we need to adjust the tax base to reflect the amount of debt that won't be collected once all recovery measures have been taken. For 23-24, we are estimating a collection rate of 95%, a moderate increase on the likely levels of collection this year of 93.9%. Growth in the property market and the reduction in claims for council tax support result in an overall growth in the tax base of 1.36%. However, this is slightly lower than that anticipated in the medium-term financial plan, resulting in an additional pressure of 1.3 million. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. So now I'd like to call on Councillor Fabian Breckles to second the report. Fabian?
Thank you, my Lord Mayor. Britain is one of the most politically centralised countries in Europe. This means we have limited revenue-raising powers and are dependent on government settlement grants to survive. The Local Government Association, which is cross-party, says this funding has been cut by 60% since 2010. So if we were to add 60% to the Local Government Settlement Fund for 2022, it would total 680 million. That's, by the way, an illustrative figure. As we all know, some government funds are ring-fenced for specific activities. But the fact is, without Tory austerity, we'd be looking at something like an extra £255 million a year. Funny how the government can cut councils and NHS to the bone, yet during the pandemic saw no problem in wasting 37 billion on a track and trace system that didn't work, doling out millions to mates for PPA contracts for stuff that was completely useless, Then there's the recent Sky News report that MPs earn 17.1 million on top of their salaries, with Tory MPs taking most of that at 15.2 million. A year ago, Tory Treasury Minister Lord Agnew resigned, accusing the government of writing off 4.3 billion in fraudulent COVID-19 grants, money that should have been helping real businesses survive the pandemic. So just think what those businesses, we and other councils, or the NHS could have done with at least some of that money. And that then Chancellor is now our Prime Minister. We are, of course, prevented from raising enough cash ourselves to cover the shortfall. In this coming budget, councils would have to raise council tax by 20% over 2 years to cover the hole that we have in our finances. And that's something with the cost of living crisis that our constituents simply cannot afford, not that we could do it anyway. We're limited to raising council tax by 3% this coming year. Unlike ordinary residents, sorry, I'm getting something in the way of this. All right, let me just a blip from the computer. So that. Well, the issue that's. Can I go on with my speech? Do you mind?
Yes. I think let's not take advantage. Fabian's lost his place for a second. Have you found your place?
Yeah,
yes.
It was the computer locked. I've got put trouble with the lappy again. Anyway, unlike ordinary residents, neither councils nor businesses are protected from rising energy costs, so that also hits our finances. The cost of living crisis and the fact the Conservative government has lost control of inflation means everything we try and do is now more expensive. Building materials are forecast to rise by 80% in 2023. So everything from fixing potholes to building council houses costs far more than it did. To make matters worse, we get a fixed budget for social care, which swallows up about 80% of our finances already. But we have no control over how many people will need social care at any given time. So as soon as that social care pot runs out, demand does not. So other services have to be cut to cover the shortfall.
I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up soon.
Yeah. Our residents have a right to know what the government has been deliberately doing to strangle councils and public services in general, because it directly affects them and the services they depend on. It's not sustainable, but it is where we are.
Thank
it stinks,
you.
But as long
Thank
as the
you,
government
Fabian.
hangs on to power, all we can do is try and survive.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Breckles. I now call on Councillor Martin Fodor from the Green Group to speak. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Lord Mayor. By law, we have to agree the council tax base, the number of chargeable properties affecting the amount of council tax we expect to collect in the coming financial year. And that's got to be done before the budget can be agreed. This is expressed, this calculation, as the total equivalent to council tax band D. But of course, in reality, the most common property we have in the city is band B. I would prefer a more progressive way of raising funds. The bands are set out in the report and they're not as fair as they could be. But we have to work with what we've got for now. And we also collect funds for the police and fire authorities, fire services as well. As a member of the Budget Working Group for the Resources Scrutiny Commission, I would like to say I think we've been really well briefed in that scrutiny group by the officers. I'd like to thank them for such a clear exposition of what the figures are, how they've been worked out, how they've modelled what it'll be in 23-24. So thanks to them for their assistance. Council tax is, I think, a bit over half the revenue the council has, so it's certainly not a panacea, and raising it is tightly controlled. Greens believe we need much greater flexibility, of course, in how local government can have democratic control over its budget and its services to suit local needs and local priorities. But sadly, we don't at present. Understanding the funds we do have and then agreeing the level we set the council tax within the constraints the government imposes is all we have for now. As you've heard, in the city, the base is calculated to be increasing by 1.36% in the next year as the city is growing. Of course, the social care demands and the other services are costing a lot more for all the reasons that have been well explored. The discounts and exemptions applicable are also set out in the report. One of the most significant of these, and we mustn't forget it, is the rising number of student exemptions. More and more students in the city means converting more family homes, and those would pay council tax, but all student houses are exempt despite their use of our services. So that's an added pressure to our budget, and it's not fully funded despite a notional government contribution. We really need more action from both universities to tackle this. It really has to be addressed. We've also been affected more positively, however, by the new rule on how valuation of partially shared accommodation, what's known as cluster flats, being developed, how they're assessed, because they're now being rated individually, and that does help us. We're also affected by rising arrears, I'm afraid. It affects the total collected, and this has to be taken into account in the model. But I do encourage everyone to have a look at the report to understand how and why we raise the council tax and set it the way we do, and I encourage adoption of the report so we can set a legal budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'd now like to call on Councillor John Goulandris to speak on behalf of the Conservative Group.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. And may I assure members that I won't be hijacking this report for a crude, crass party political broadcast like some. As more sensible speakers have said, this is a technical report, and res ipsa loquita, the facts speak for themselves. Nonetheless, this is a very important report, as it shows the total number of Band D equivalent households in Bristol which are subject to council tax, and provide in aggregate a core element of the council's income. As we would all agree, we need more income. The good news is that after 2 years of decline, no doubt one of the many unintended consequences of COVID lockdown, we're now seeing an increase in the council tax base, an increase of 1.36% for 2023-24, which equates to 1,737 Band D home equivalents. Given the huge amount of development taking place in Bristol, residents reading this report may be puzzled by the relatively modest growth in the council tax base over the past 3 years. Unfortunately, the principle of ceteris paribus doesn't apply here, and not all houses are equal. National legislation exempts, for example, student accommodation from the council tax base. This, as other speakers have mentioned, has huge implications for a city like Bristol with 2 large universities. In addition, smaller properties, which will be banded A or B, will need to be aggregated to make a Band D equivalent, and many of the new units currently being completed are indeed smaller, lower banded properties. In summary, it is pleasing to see that after 2 fallow years, we are now once again seeing an increase in the council tax base, and long may that continue. Thank you, my Lord Mayor.
Thank you, John. I thought that the Boris Johnson School of Oratory was very much last year, but I'm glad to see you stepping into it. Thank you. Very entertaining.
My Lord Mayor, we don't let him speak unless there's Latin involved.
Okay, thank you. So can we now move to Councillor Andrew Brown, please, to speak on behalf of the Liberal Democrat Group. And can we have some Latin, please?
No. Thank you, my Lord Mayor.
Ipso Mori.
I've probably said this before, but one of the frustrating things about speaking in this position is that often what I want to say has already been said, especially on the less controversial pieces of business. I'm also conscious I spoke an awfully lot last time we were all here, so I'm going to keep today's speeches brief. Last year my group abstained from supporting the council tax base, as we felt that it was understated in the papers we had at that time. And I believe we have been proved right when looking at the papers in front of us today. The number of council tax reduction scheme claimants has decreased compared to a projected rise, and the number of properties completed was higher than it was assumed that it would be. However, one thing that was called right last year was the increase in provision for non-payment, and we agree that it's prudent to extend this again going forward. This rise is at a time when those claiming on the reduction scheme is this rise in non-payment at a time when those claiming on the reduction scheme is falling is worrying. At first sight, this seems at odds with a decreasing take-up of CTRS, and there could, of course, be people who are eligible for help that aren't claiming it. But it's possibly indicative of the way the current cost of living crisis is impacting on families that would normally be above the threshold for benefits. I think this is going to become an increasingly important area as we go forward this year, with inflation being what it is, energy costs being what they are. As we move on to consider the budget over the next couple of months, we should bear these people in mind, as they will be amongst those most impacted by the decisions we make. However, coming back to this year's figures, we have more confidence in the assumptions made and the resulting council tax base, and we will be supporting the paper.
Thank you very much. And can we finally move to Councillor Gary Hopkins, please, to speak on behalf of the Knoll Community Party. Thank you.
No Latin, but we'll keep it short. So basically, let's firstly agree that council tax is not a sensible tax, but we're not going to change that here. We also, though, need to look forward to a revaluation, because even if you've got council tax, it needs to be sensibly based upon the real value of properties, which are based at the moment is not. Again, that's outside our control. The third area of concern is student housing. Now, basically, I find it regrettable that we have not banded together with other cities that face similar problems to lobby central government more strongly, because we actually face large bills for looking after student accommodation, but we don't get the money in. And if we get the money from central government, I think it would balance things better and make people less aggressive against student housing. Having said that, this is a technical report. I say in lots of reports that I look at in this council, I'm extremely concerned at the lack of clarity or accuracy. That is not the case here. We have officers who are doing an efficient job. They have got the act together, and we are in a position where we must pass this because it's a technical move towards setting a balanced budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Deputy Mayor, you have an opportunity to respond. Do you wish?
Well, I mean, there are a few interesting points touched on there. One is about whether or not this is too prudent, I suppose, and I guess that's a judgment in it. And every year, I think we've been getting closer year on year as we try and kind of refine the calculation to be as accurate as possible. So I take Andrew's point, but we are on a journey and it is improving. With regard to the kind of basic concepts, obviously, at the moment, council tax is based on the valuation of properties in 1991. It's ridiculous. There are bits of this city that have absolutely transformed in that time, where very wealthy people are paying very low amounts of council tax because they happen to live in an area that has gentrified at a rapid rate. So the whole concept does need a review. That said, as has been mentioned, it's a technical report. We do need to pass it, so I urge everyone to vote for it.
Thank you, Craig. Thank you. The recommendation is shown on the screen, and this will be an e-vote. Ensure that you're seated in your correctly allocated seats so that your vote is accurate. The voting will, you're voting on this recommendation, and the vote will be open for 15 seconds. Yes, we're all ready for it. Please vote now. So, thank you. The recommendation actually is to agree, in accordance with the local authorities' calculation of Council Tax Base England Regulations 2012, the amount calculated by Bristol City Council as its council tax base for the financial year 2023-2024 shall be £129,654, and the recommendation has been approved. That concludes agenda item 9. Thank you. On now to a similar one, agenda item 10, which is the collection fund surplus deficit for 2022-2023. I'd like to call again on Councillor Craig Cheney to move the report. Busy man today.
Yeah, thank you, Lord Mayor. This is another technical report. This report is part of our obligation to determine the surplus or deficit on the collection fund in respect of council tax and business rates with precepting authorities. Although the pandemic continues to impact on both our citizens and businesses, there are positive signs for the local economy. Despite economic forecasts suggesting otherwise, in Bristol, claims to our council tax reduction scheme have fallen significantly, particularly amongst working age claimants. This has resulted in a £4.7 million saving against the 22-23 budget. However, council tax arrears do remain high, and so it is necessary to set aside additional provision to cover the possibility of being unable to collect some of these arrears, particularly the older debt. Many businesses have continued to receive support from government in business rate relief. To date, the council has received £12.9 million in government grant. The majority of this has been used to offset accounts in debit, significantly reducing in-year and prior year arrears and reducing the provision required to cover business rate debt. Appeals against business rate valuations also seem to be tailing off following a significant spike during 21-22. This means any top-up of the appeals provision will be significantly less than in last year. The savings in council tax support, along with the reduction in outstanding business rate debt, are the primary reasons for the surplus on the collection fund for 22-23, the council's share of which is £1.7 million for council tax and £3.1 million for business rates. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. I'd now like to call on Councillor Zoe Goodman to second the report.
Hello. I note the estimated surplus against budget for the council tax receipts and the deficit for non-domestic rates. As Councillor Cheney said, there was a reduction in the estimated cost of support for the council tax reduction scheme of £4.7 million due to the ongoing drop in pensioner and working age claimants since the peak pandemic period, which was opposite to what had been estimated, that we assumed that the number of claimants would continue to increase like they did during the peak pandemic. But with the current cost of living crisis, there is a clear risk this number could start increasing again, or there could be increased levels of arrears if people are not eligible for the council tax reduction scheme. I note also that there's been an increase in council tax debt arrears during the pandemic, but it was correct that the council chose to pause recovery action during the pandemic to support households to manage its impact, rather than aggressively pursuing arrears. Through officers focusing on supporting citizens to maintain their ongoing payments, arrears will start to reduce. With the cost of living crisis, it's important we're sensitive to those in debt and continue to work with them to reduce arrears. I commend the officers for their work on the finances and arrears over the year in these continuing difficult circumstances, and commend this report.
Thank you, Councillor Goodman. I'd now like to call on Councillor Heather Mack from the Green Group to speak on the subject. Thank you.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and thank you to all our finance officers who are doing some very difficult work right now and prepared this report. So just a few thoughts for me. Firstly, the council tax reduction scheme, as we've mentioned, spent less than was budgeted, and I think that's great news. It means more people are therefore earning enough to no longer need the scheme, which is against what we were predicting. And I do hope it's that and not people who do need it not knowing about it. I was elected here to be political, so I might well make some political points in my speech. That's what we're stood up for. Otherwise, why not ask 5 officers to stand up and speak to a report? This scheme, I really hope that this reduction in the costs and the ongoing predictions will help us protect this scheme. It is brilliantly easy to administer, and it benefits and targets those that are most at need. Throughout my time on resources scrutiny, the scheme has come up a number of times. We've been asked by the administration to scrutinise it, to consider taking it out to consultation. It has been at risk. And I think the whole of our scrutiny commission understands its value and the importance, and we will all continue to watch closely and make the case for its protection. I should mention a few risks and other concerns from the report. Our business rate collection has stayed consistent throughout pandemic years due to the government support, but there is concern about this ceasing and whether businesses have recovered and are able to pay the rates. And then business rates appeals. This has been a real problem with our budget for a good number of years. In 21-22, the appeals provision stood at 25 million. I mean, if we think of that figure, that's similar to the gap in the budget we're facing. The government now recommends that 4.7% of net rates should be set aside, and we have unknown number of appeals coming. In 21-22, office accommodation was targeted, and it was potentially overvalued, and I think that's something to consider when we are looking at producing a lot more office accommodation in the city. But the good news is that in 22-23, the appeals, these business rate appeals, seem to have slowed significantly. Perhaps these agents that are equivalent to no-win, no-fee personal accident lawyers have decided that now isn't the time to take more money from local government. Perhaps businesses realise that they won't do very well if there's no funding for social care, to keep people healthy and get them back to work, to help workers with care for elderly and childcare responsibilities. I think at a time when a majority of our residents are saying that they would opt to pay the maximum increase in council tax, maybe businesses are realising this isn't the time to get as much money out of us as possible. And so I do hope these appeals continue to reduce. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mack. Can I now call on Councillor Jeff Gollop to speak on behalf of the Conservative Group?
Thank you, my Lord Mayor. In my view, the collection fund is sufficiently complicated that I'm going to confine my remarks to English. And I say that in the context that a lot of local government finance is complicated, and there are some bits that you can look at year in, year out and be briefed, as my resources colleagues have spoken earlier have been this year, and you understand it for 24 to 48 hours afterwards. And then you look at it and think, can this really be? And this is very much the case here. I understand the collection fund pulls together the council tax that we have to collect, and it allows for the rate we collect it at, and it allows for the bad debts that arise. I can just about cope with that. I have to say that when we start to administer the largest benefit the council pays out through the collection fund, it becomes slightly more problematic. And that's not a criticism of the council tax reduction scheme, it's a criticism of the way local government finance forces us to account for it. Because there's £42 million going out of the collection fund in the form of benefit, which is a variable amount which can vary according to the economic cycle. So we found, because of the triple lock on pensions, and because the economy had been performing better, we found that actually we had 4.7 million over provided. That's a real bonus, and that money comes back in next year. But if the economy deteriorates as it appears to be doing, those costs come back to hit us a year later. It is not an ideal way, but I make clear, my Lord Mayor, that's not a criticism of Craig or of anybody else. In fact, what we should be saying, Craig, please convey our congratulations to your finance officers for a remarkable job of forecasting in times when most people don't know what's going to happen next week. And they've actually produced a forecast over the last 12 months that's remarkably accurate. But, Lord Mayor, it gets even more complicated, because if we go to the business rate, we have, again, a whole series of factors. Talked about the appeals, but let's also talk about government support. Everyone in this chamber is really happy to criticise the government, but actually we should put on record really generous contribution through the COVID Additional Relief Fund. It brought £12.9 million in. And you know, Lord Mayor, it would be a lot easier for us to be lobbying government for more funding if just occasionally there was a compliment from the administration rather than criticism, even when there's a really positive story. But other than that, my Lord Mayor, it's a good report with an enormous amount of work being put in by officers, and we're happy to support. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gollop. And can I now call on Councillor Andrew Brown to speak on behalf of the Liberal Democrat Group?
Thank you, my Lord Mayor. It is a complex area, and I think we should be thankful that nobody's resorted to Anglo-Saxon as yet. Last year I suggested that since I had been elected, I'd become even more of a view that the system of local taxation, business rates and funding of local government in this country should be torn down and rebuilt. And I feel even more like that now after being here a year and a half. Looking at the figures, it's easy to highlight that there's a surplus this year in the council tax fund, caused in part by the underestimation of the council tax base last year. But we still had to make additional provision for uncollected tax. And I think going forward, as we face economic hardship, that's again going to become potentially a recurring theme in these debates each year. Counterintuitively, the opposite is true on the business rate side of the equation. We had a deficit, but we were able to claw some money back from provisions. The figures in the report, of course, are a matter of fact, but the context of the report is the funding of the council is founded on shaky and uncertain ground, with little to no certainty on the funding settlements it will receive each year, or indeed how much of the business rates collected can be retained. And we've already heard some of that in the debate. Last year we had a deficit in the collection fund, this year we have a surplus, but the underlying picture is the same. Our officers are asked to perform a complex juggling act, never knowing whether the next item that they'll be holding up will be a ball, a flaming torch or a chainsaw. And when it comes to the taxes that we do set and collect, we are beset with constraints and issues. A valuation and banding system that is well past its sell-by date on council tax that needs serious reform, if not abolishment and replacement. Limits to the extent to which we can raise the tax if we so wished. A disproportionate number of properties in the lower tiers has already been mentioned. The impact of the two universities and the lack of compensation for lost revenue as a result of the student exemption, and regularly changing goalposts when it comes to business rates. Against that background, I would like to thank the finance officers for their efforts in keeping all the balls in the air each year. My group will be voting to approve this report.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. I'd now like to call finally on Councillor Hopkins, please, from the Knoll Community Party.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. The key calculation in here, which feeds all the way through our budgeting, is will we get the council tax in that we're hoping to get in? And some people have commented that the figure that's been used is over-optimistic. I don't agree. We have a cost of living crisis, but it doesn't affect everybody equally. Unfortunately, the people at the bottom are being hit hardest, and very hard indeed. Now, we made the sensible decision in this council not to try to collect council tax from those people, because it would be enormously expensive and unfair. So, because we've got a position where some of the most vulnerable we're not seeking to collect council tax from, our percentage, therefore, could be that bit better. So, sensible decisions. Thank you to the officers for doing a very competent job, and let's approve this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hopkins. Deputy Mayor, do you want to respond? Got a few words for us?
Well, I suppose to comment probably on Councillor Brown's points around sort of forecasting and the shaky sands. I mean, in 2 years' time, business rates are reset, and at the same time, potentially those within the 100% business rate retention pilots are changed to what we don't know yet. So our ability to forecast even beyond 2 years is almost impossible. What we know is probably going to cost us quite a chunk of money. So I absolutely agree with what you're saying, and there is a big conversation to be had about the whole system being torn down and started again. Beyond that, I have nothing else to add.
Thank you, Craig. Okay, so once again, this is an e-relations are shown on the screen, and once you're all in your right seats and Tom gives me the nod, I will say that you are ready to... Okay? Okay. Can you vote now, please? You have 15 seconds. Excellent. That was a unanimous vote. So the recommendation has been approved. And the recommendations, there are two of them. The first one is that an estimated surplus as at the 31st of March 2023 on the council tax element of the collection fund of 1.960 million declared for 2022-23 between the council, the Police and Crime Commissioner for Avon and Somerset, and the Avon Fire and Rescue Service in proportion to their 1922-23 precepts on the collection fund. And the second recommendation that has been approved is that an estimated deficit as at the 31st of March 2023 on the non-domestic rates element of the collection fund, net of grants, of 3.358 million be declared for 2022-2023 and shared between this council, Avon Fire and Rescue Service and the West of England Combined Authority in proportion to the appropriate year demands, which is Bristol 95%, Weka 4%, Avon Fire and Rescue Service 1%. So, as I said, this item has been unanimously approved, and this concludes agenda item 10. We have one final agenda item before we have a break, and this is the recommendation of the Independent Remuneration Panel. I would like to move the report, and I ask the Deputy Lord Mayor, Councillor Steve Smith, to second.
Seconded, my Lord Mayor.
Thank you. The recommendation is to consider the recommendations of the Independent Remuneration Panel and to approve the scheme as proposed. This is an aye-nay vote. So all those in favour say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Thank you. So that has been approved. Thank you. This concludes agenda item 11, and we are now at the point where we're going to have an adjournment. We'll have an adjournment for 20 minutes. It's sort of just gone 22, so if we could just get back, I would aim for us all to be back at 4, and then we'll get away quite early. So we will try to start the meeting again at 4, and definitely a hard start at 4:05 at the very latest. Thank you. I said a hard start at 5 past, and here we are still jollily chatting away to each other. The good news is that we do not have to ask for an extension of time, so we can go straight to the golden motion. If I can just, I didn't put a reminder in earlier, but when at the earlier part of the meeting when we did the declarations of interest, it was explained, and this is for people watching more so than anybody else, it was explained that people who have an interest in the golden motion topic, either essentially, again to explain it to the public, anybody who is a landlord or is a tenant will not be in this meeting to take part in the debate. So if the chamber looks a little bit empty, that's the cause and the reason of it. So the motion will be shown on the screen, and this motion has been altered, which means that all groups have agreed to it being changed from its original wording. The altered motion was published yesterday as a supplement to the agenda. So I see that Councillor Tom Reynard awaits with eager expectation to stand up and propose this motion for us. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. This continues to be a matter very close to my heart. I rented in this city for over a decade. And whilst I was a renter, I saw and experienced much. And fundamentally, there's no one in this chamber that can disagree that there is a chasm that exists in the power imbalance between the minimal protections that renters have and the powers that landlords and letting agents continue to hold. Complain about the conditions of your property, there may be a threat of retaliation of losing your home. Landlord or letting agent just wants new tenants, a no-fault eviction may be on its way. Refuse to pay the rent increase, you may be kicked out and replaced with someone who will, irrespective of whether it's affordable to them. In a recent piece by Inside Housing, they noted that almost 53,000 households were threatened with homelessness due to Section 21 notices between April 2019 and June 2022. We're nearly 4 years on since the promise of banning of no-fault evictions was announced. So where is our Renters Reform Bill? Enough is enough. Tenants cannot wait any longer for better protections. And tenants also can't wait any longer for affordability to be addressed in the private rented sector. Renting in Bristol has gotten more expensive faster than most UK markets outside of London, while the cost of exiting the rental market has also become more expensive faster than most markets outside of London. Yes, of course, we need to build more social housing in this city, and we're committed to that through Project 1000, which is getting more affordable homes built. However, the continued marketisation of housing has seen homes become increasingly unaffordable to buy and rent across the country. Homes should first and foremost be a fundamental human right. This means we need rent controls. I want to commend the work of the Living Rent Commission, individuals and groups willing to work collaboratively to work through complex issues. And this includes considering the potential unintended consequences of any systems we may lobby to introduce. With this Chamber's support, we will bring the findings here for debate and endorsement in the near future. A year ago, when I led calls for the banning of discrimination against those on benefits and with protected characteristics, I was clear in my commitment to renters in this city. We will fight for those powers to control rents and introduce a living rent. We will continue to fight to protect renters and challenge discrimination. And we will continue to lobby for more protections for renters, address power imbalances. Labour in Bristol is delivering on its commitments for renters, and we will continue to do so to improve conditions for private renters, lobby for the powers to introduce rent controls, and make sure we address the affordability crisis in housing in Bristol. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Reynard. Now I'd like to turn and ask Councillor Carla Denyer of the Green Group to second the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hathaway was going to second this motion, but unfortunately isn't allowed to, because the Council's pecuniary interest rules have been interpreted to mean that renters can't have a say on the rental market in the city. That's an interpretation I disagree with, but here we are. So I'm speaking to it on behalf of a resident in my ward called Tom Hathaway. He and all the Greens who've had to leave would be voting for this if they could. For decades, the free market has been able to pinch and squeeze people and the planet to the benefit of an ever smaller number of individuals. But that period is over. There is nothing left to squeeze. Nowhere is this more evident than the private rented sector, where Thatcher's market deregulation left tenants with little protection from price shocks and the threat of eviction at any time. The private rented sector has ballooned, while social housing, genuinely affordable homes for families, has dwindled. Pile on years of austerity, recent global events and economic chaos unleashed by the government, and there is nothing to stop the sudden additional financial burden being dumped on tenants. What happens when someone can no longer afford their rent? If by some miracle you've been able to save, cheap money has inflated the cost of buying a house beyond the reach of most. And if you qualify for social housing, well, you can only join the waiting list of over 18,000 households in Bristol. As Greens, we believe that housing should be first and foremost about providing quality homes as a cornerstone for a happy and healthy life. We realise the need for urgent intervention, and it's great to see Scotland, with Greens in government, carefully but determinedly leading the way on stabilising rent rises. Whilst we wait for our own government to catch up and devolve the rent control powers we need, this motion includes actions we can take as a council now to better engage with and raise standards for Bristol's 130,000 private renters. It recognises the creep of bidding wars into the rental sector and the long-term impact Right to Buy has had on the housing market. With Green input, it now pledges to set up a new forum for tenants where they can seek advice on their rights and responsibilities, review enforcement policy to ensure those who fail to meet standards are dealt with promptly, and build on the work of the Living Rent Commission by publishing an index for what living rents should be in Bristol. I want to say thank you to the private housing team who work incredibly hard to support tenants and landlords, and to the Living Rent Commission for their work. We look forward to their report coming to full council. Thank you to Tom, to both Toms in fact, from me and the Labour Group for bringing this motion and working with Greens on practical alterations, and I hope you'll all join in showing tenants that we hear them by supporting this motion today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Denyer. I'd now like to hear from speakers on the motion, and the first speaker is Councillor Marley Bennett to speak for the Labour Group, please.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I want to thank Tom for bringing this important motion forward, and also the Green Group for their friendly alterations to it. Before I start, I want to echo the comments we've heard from Carla and say that it seems obscene to be in the position of debating housing policy whilst councillors who find themselves renting are forbidden from speaking. As councillors, we were elected by the public to tackle issues like this. We owe it to them to be able to do so. Unfortunately, I'm not an owner-occupier. I'm only able to speak today because Bristol's high rents have me, at 27 years old, back living with my parents. Anyone who has rented a property in Bristol knows how the sector is broken. Cases of dangerous and run-down properties, or landlords evicting a tenant at short notice just to let the very same property out with a much higher rent, are far too common. It's difficult to secure any rented property and nigh on impossible to get one that's affordable. Not being able to move out means people can't move from inappropriate living arrangements, from being stuck in hostile house shares to having to live with ex-partners. It is true that most private landlords are good landlords. The problem is there is a huge power imbalance when tenants can be evicted without a good reason in a matter of weeks, and then forced into the crushing experience of trying to find somewhere new to rent. Renters are putting up with so much that they shouldn't have to, too scared to ask their landlord to make repairs in case they raise the rent or turf them out of their home. Bristol is a great place to live, but the problem is that too many people know that. When there is more demand for housing than there is supply, it is those on the lowest incomes who lose out. That's why we're seeing gentrification, and key workers and people who are born and raised in Bristol find that they can't afford to live here. As a country, we have failed to build enough homes to meet people's needs, particularly that of younger generations. In Bristol, we're rightly focusing on building new homes, of which as many as possible are social or affordable, but we can only do so much until our ambition is matched nationally. Rent controls in some form, such as restricting excessive rises, will have an important role to play going forward, and I look forward to seeing the findings of the Living Rent Commission report. Controls should not be allowed to jeopardise investment to create more homes, which is the only way to tackle the lack of housing that is the fundamental issue creating these problems. This motion has sorely needed proposals, from cracking down on illegal letting agents' fees and bidding wars to preventing the issuing of Section 21 evictions where we can. the landlord licensing pilot significantly improved the quality of housing in Eastville's private rented sector. There are over 3,000 properties inspected and 90% of them subsequently improved. Expanding the scheme across Bristol, ensuring properties are fit to live in and of a decent standard, will benefit renters in every ward. Finally, support for rental reform is a necessity too. Renters should be able to treat where they're living as their home. They deserve a secure tenancy, rather than the current insecurity knowing they could be evicted at a moment's notice. I hope every councillor present will be able to support this important motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Thank you. Now I'd like to call on Councillor Tony Dyer to speak on behalf of the Green Group.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Lord Mayor, the Conservatives came to power following a financial crash triggered by a crisis in the housing market. In the almost 13 years since then, the Conservatives have done next to nothing to fix the fundamental weaknesses of our housing market, where the government has continued to cede control to the same market forces that triggered the crash that brought the Tories to power in the first place. The private rental sector in particular is a clear example of why the provision of homes cannot simply be abandoned to the private sector and market forces. Only a third of private renters in the Bristol area are private renters by choice. Another third would prefer to be homeowners, but ever-increasing house prices mean that instead of paying off their own mortgage, they're often paying off their landlord's mortgage instead. Another 1 in 4 of private renters cannot afford to pay their rent without housing benefit. As a result, the government is using public funds to indirectly fund private landlords that charge more than the market can bear, resulting in billions of pounds per year of public money being directed towards private landlords, whilst local authorities and housing associations are starved of the funding they need to provide decent homes that people can actually afford to live in. The Thatcherite dream of a nation of homeowners has long died. The percentage of people who own their own homes in Bristol is today almost exactly the same as it was when Thatcher came to power. Instead, it is the renter sector that has changed, with thousands of Bristolians transferred from secure, long-term tenancies in affordable council homes, now finding themselves in precarious, short-term lets of ever more unaffordable and largely unregulated private investments. We cannot continue to wait for the party of Westminster landlords to offer solutions to the housing crisis. We need to work together to take whatever actions we can locally, whilst campaigning for further change at national level, whether that is in challenging undeliverable housing targets or combating unaffordable rent rises. Please support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dyer. I'd now like to turn to Councillor Mark Weston to speak on behalf of the Conservative Group.
Thank you very much, my Lord Mayor. I've often wondered, I understand the party opposite are a party of principles. I wondered what exact percentage of those principles were sacrosanct, but now I know. Because you put forward a golden motion of 54 lines. 54 lines of exactly what you believe. You retained 11 of them. So it obvious to me that 79% of your desires, your ambitions, is up for grabs. I'm used to seeing wrecking amendments, but a wrecking altered motion for me is phenomenal. It's phenomenal. But let's move on to actually the guts of it. On the altered motion that we've got, it is better than it was. It is better than it was. I take that. You talk about your resolving. Sorry, I've got the altered motion that was sent out on our thing. Are you looking at something else?
I think we can...
You can. 54, you can retain 11 lines. So anyway.
You'll have an opportunity to respond.
All right. When it comes to exactly what you're talking about, there actually are some very good ideas. There genuinely are, and I would support them. So the council resolves, having a public accessible list of enforcement notices where you can actually track what the landlords are doing is not just a good idea, it's an excellent idea. I rented for 10 years in Bristol. I'm happy to say actually I had fairly good landlords throughout that period, but the insecurity that weighs on your mind, especially when you've got kids, it is phenomenal. It's bad way before you have kids, but when you've got kids, there's that extra frisson of excitement, shall we say, every time the 6-month renewal comes along. The problem is when it comes to your solutions, rent controls don't work. And I repeat this again and again. The council resolves bits, okay, fine, but this council believes rent controls will work. Maybe they should be equitable, proportionate, and data-driven. Maybe they should. Ideally, they would. But at no point do they actually work. If you take Berlin, Berlin brought in rent controls. The real estate analysis is that what rent controls did there was cut supply by 41% at the time when demand rose by 172%. Stockholm, rent controls brought in. You've got an 11.3-year average rate to get a rent-controlled property. Scotland, rent controls have come in. The immediate aftermath of that was the shelving of an affordable housing scheme that would deliver 11,000 affordable houses. Rent controls are not the solution. They never have been. It so distorts the market that the only people it helps, and it does help a few, is the people that are actually on it at the moment, but the instant they want to move or someone else wants to join it, you destroy that economic basis. So Asa Lindbeck, and I realise the Swedish economist, famously said, and he's a little incendiary in this, in many cases, rent control appears to be the most efficient technique presently known to destroy a city, except for bombing. Rent controls don't work. You look at New York, you have gentrification on a massive scale. Chinatown in New York is becoming a shadow of its former self because rent controls led it. If you bring in the same to Bristol, you are not going to solve a solution that is inherently a problem of supply and demand. That is the issue here. Your solution doesn't rectify that. So we can't support the motion. We agree with a lot of what you're resolving to do, but this council believes the rent controls work. This side of the chamber does not. Thank you very much, my Lord
Thank you,
Mayor.
Councillor Weston. Can I now call on Councillor Tim Kent to speak on behalf of the Liberal Democrat group, please?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. If it helps Councillor Weston, I think you may find there's an extra page, and you will find actually, to be fair, I don't think there's any deletions to the Labour original motion. But it is a little bit confusing. You need to scroll across, and you will find the actual existing motion still there. So I thank the authors of the Golden Motion, and I credit both sides for that, for giving us the ability to debate this here tonight. It is a shame that the chamber has been greatly reduced. Like a lot of councillors, I am concerned that so many of our colleagues have been excluded from today. I do think perhaps as a council we should consider writing to the Secretary of State to seek guidance on this, or maybe even to lobby for a change in the law. So clearly when you're bringing forth major items of importance, you shouldn't be excluding people's representatives, especially those with actual life experience of what they're talking about. It seems a bit bizarre to me. Anyway, for now you have to pardon my drivel, I'm afraid. My group, as limited as we are, and we're even more limited tonight because half of them have received the legal cull and marched out of the door, support the main thrust of the motion and recognise the immense difficulty that increases in housing costs are causing here in our city. And that's across the board. That is for renters, for buyers, for students, everybody within the housing market, especially who are coming in, are facing real difficulties. We support many of the measures proposed and had a few other ideas that we wanted to add in, that perhaps we can add into any future debate. Aiding young renters with more flexible starter loans to help people getting into the sector, help them when they have to make that first, especially rental properties without furnishings could be a real problem for people. Looking at the growth of the university numbers and whether that is having an effect on the housing market or not. We talk about it a lot. We don't really actually know. Is that a positive or a negative effect? We think that's something we should look into. Ensuring flexible social housing and an increase in key worker housing. There was a lot of talk 15 years ago about key worker housing. It's sort of gone down the radar a bit, and I think the motion recognises that's an issue, and we think that's a good idea. There's a few more there. I might bung them in an email, actually, and save time. But there was just a few ideas we wanted to add into the debate. Within the motion, we strongly support greater protections for renters. Of course, some of my colleagues would have liked to have told you about their actual experiences in greater detail, but unfortunately, they're the ones we've heaved out of the chamber, ironically. It's a great shame that we have lost those voices, I think, from this debate, but I think I've made that point. There clearly is a gross imbalance And with many younger people priced out of being able to buy a property, they're then trapped within a rental system that is clearly stacked against them, both financially and legally. So we're still keen that we should try to work with central government on this, but obviously that requires pushing them, that requires campaigning. So congratulations to those that have been campaigning on this. Keep it up. You will win. As an example today, Stephen Williams saved the Central Library. So don't stop campaigning.
Thank you. You're well over time. I was letting you round it up there, but now we're moving on to another topic. Thank you. Could we lastly and finally come to Councillor Hopkins from the Knoll Community Party?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. As with others, there's a huge list of things that we actually approve of in terms of making certain that we get an expansion of licensing, that we give advice to tenants to make certain they're not ripped off, and getting rid of lobbying to get rid of the no-fault eviction. So really, there's an awful lot that we do agree on. But I'm looking at a paragraph here which I find quite staggering. It actually says that we will actually have the report from this commission that was set up by Labour Party, and we will commit to actually implementing it. And yet it says we don't know what's in it. I mean, how can you possibly put a motion along those lines? It might be that we do agree on what's in the report. It might be that we don't. But what is the point in setting up a commission to do a report and then saying we're going to vote for it anyway, whatever they say? I mean, I'm sorry, but that means by itself that we cannot support this motion, despite the fact that there are so many parts of it that we actually approve of. And one of the key things that actually must be done in terms of redressing the balance when there is an imbalance is actually building more social housing. That is the best way to tackle this problem. That is absolutely the best way. It means that those people that we need to be in the city, who can't afford to be, we can look after them. And if there's a commitment to that, I think that will get support from all sides of this chamber, not just some. So we can't support because of that nonsense paragraph. It is quite ridiculous. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hopkins. I'm now going to go directly back to Councillor Renard to respond. Are you happy to respond? I think we might have something to say about sums, maths, counting lines.
I get it wrong, and I apologise for the first 30 seconds of my comments.
Fair point.
I failed to follow a tracked change document. My apologies.
Thank you. A gracious apology.
I do appreciate it. It's a bit of a theme in the Conservative Party at the moment about mathematics.
We can't always count as Islamic.
So, I think at the end of the day, I welcome the most of the contributions in this hall from today's debate. It's clear that we need to do more to support renters, and I would welcome any additions that Liberal Democrat colleagues would like to put forward, and do send those across. We need to get more social homes built. There is no debate in that, but that's going to take a while, and we have a housing crisis with over 19,000 households on our waiting list, and it's getting worse, and the larger reasons it's getting worse is because of the problems in the private renters sector. We have got to address it, and there are many systems of rent control all over the world, and this is why we're working with the University of Bristol and an academic who is a lead in this field to look at all this, who contributed to the Scotland proposals and analysing a lot of that work as well. The thing is, you need to also read more into what's happened in Germany and other places, including Sweden, where investment has continued in housing. But it is right that we should look at the issue of supply. We must look at what could be the unintended consequences of any policy that is brought in. That is accepted and something that the Commission will be considering very carefully. So thank you to those of you in the chamber today that are supporting. Thank you to those that haven't even perhaps read the motion properly and tried to give me a maths lesson. And I look forward to this motion passing the House today. Thank you. OK, so we move to the vote. This will be an
please ensure that you're in allocated seats, unless you've been banished, so that your vote is recorded accurately. Yep, you're voting on the motion and the vote will be open now for 15 seconds. Thank you. You can see there quite clearly the motion has been passed with 35 for, 2 abstain and 9 against. Thank you. So the motion has been passed. Excellent. Now it's time to move on to the silver motion. Shall we have a little pause for a second? We need to welcome our members back in who have been banished. So in you come. We'll just take a minute or two for people to come in and get settled.
Is that you? You're Paul Renter, John? I find that hard to believe somehow. Good job I didn't say anything horrible, isn't it?
Okay, I think we're all back in the room. Excellent. Nice to see a full chamber again. So the silver motion is, the title is Preserving Bristol's Transport and Design Powers for the Future. The motion is shown on the screen in the room during the proposer's speech, and I can now ask Councillor Ed Plowden from the Green Group to propose the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, my Lord Mayor. We need to make rapid and transformational changes to our cities to tackle the climate emergency. The One City study found that decarbonising Bristol's transport by 2030 is potentially achievable, with a 50% reduction in car miles travelled in the city and switching remaining vehicles to ultra-low emission standards. Meanwhile, we're embarking on 2 of the largest regeneration projects in Bristol in living memory, Temple Quarter and Western Harbour. To do all this well, we need expertise embedded in the council for the long haul. But incredibly, the Cabinet is proposing unilaterally to transfer all responsibility for transport strategy to WECA and to disband the in-house expertise in the City Design Service. And what a time to do it. Weeks after a damning report on how WECA functions, criticising a lack of collaboration. Weeks after the government has stated we need great design to be at the heart of planning. Just as Baines and South Gloss councils are recruiting more staff to deliver the £500 million of WECA-funded transport projects, just as the Clean Air Zone gets going and we need to learn its lessons, and just as the government released £32 million of funding to improve and develop the skills of council officers to design our future cities. Surely this is the time we need teams who are dedicated to our city long-term and understand how it works. Now, don't get me wrong, there is a case for change. Our planning service is failing to manage applications in time and take robust enforcement action against rogue developers. And it's true that not everything that the city design does is perfect. Look at the ongoing confusion about how bikes are meant to navigate the city centre. We do indeed sometimes need external expertise, but we need the consultants on tap, not on top. And certainly not to hand over to them lock, stock and barrel, especially when this may cost more money and force us to repay government grant. Baines and South Gloucester are not disbanding their teams, and neither have Labour councils in Birmingham, Manchester, Liverpool or Yorkshire, who are all part of combined authorities. Surely Labour is for in-house services. I think you know that Unison is supporting this Green motion. Now, I understand the proposals are not yet complete, and that is the exact point of this motion. Not to oppose all changes, but for due diligence and for the information we need to make decisions to be transparently available. For the benefits, options and risks to be clearly stated and debated within Bristol and as part of a strategic review of WECA in partnership with the other local authorities. Exactly what the auditors recommended. Yes, let's be really ambitious, Mr. Ridgewell. Let's push for a proper integrated transport authority, maybe even one with precept powers, something that will take time and careful planning but might be able to raise our ambition overall for transport. So if you accept in the future that we as politicians are going to have to take the time to work smartly and collaboratively alongside specialist officers to craft the Bristol of the future, I urge you to join the Green Party and vote for this motion. Thank you, my Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Plowden. I'd now like to call on Councillor Emma Edwards to speak on to second it for the Greens.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I rise to second this motion. We know the challenges that this council faces in delivering just climate strategies and transport infrastructure for Bristol now and in the future. And to meet those challenges, we need expertise from people invested in the process. We need effective collaboration. Collaboration between fellow councillors, between councillors and officers, and between the transport teams and communities. If strategic city transport staff are moved to WECA and projects are outsourced to consultants, we lose this vital collaboration. Residents and communities feel empowered when they can work with councillors to solve problems, find ways to improve their neighbourhoods and have input into regeneration projects. And councillors can facilitate this when they're able to work with teams that they trust. If the administration outsources projects to the control of the wider authority or consultancies, then they are taking this power and influence and collaboration away from residents and us who are elected to represent them. Is this really what the Labour councillors want? For Bristol to be designed and managed by hired contractors, outsourced companies who have no knowledge of the communities that they are designing for. It's also important to recognise that the staff members who are impacted by this. So I'd like to finish by sharing part of a statement written by a member of the transport team that was written for Cabinet in December. They weren't allowed to read it then, so I'm going to keep it anonymous, but I really think it's important that we add their voice to this debate. I work in the city transport team. As a team, there isn't a part of Bristol's transport system we don't touch. We undertake investigations after collisions, design safer streets, implement changes suggested by councillors and members of the public. We support and advise people on changing their behaviours to more sustainable and cleaner ways to travel. We oversee work done by developers. We help the city get more active by designing new cycle lanes and nicer places to walk. We assess the city's resilience to flooding and deliver schemes to better protect citizens from future flood events and ensure the impact of new developments does not increase flood risk elsewhere. Everyone in Bristol's day-to-day lives, their opportunity to work, ability to play and exercise, and their right to take part in society is all affected by transport and the availability of it. We are proud that Bristol was the first city to declare a climate emergency and the subsequent ambitious transport targets it has set. We understand the need for cuts, but we ask, please don't make any rash decisions without thinking about the implications first. We love our work. We are passionate about making a fairer, safer, cleaner city. We join the council because we want to help, and this is why we want to stay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. So now we're going to hear from the speakers on the motion, and I'd first like to call on Councillor Tim Rippington to speak on behalf of the Labour Group.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. The motion's primary aim of asking an important decision is taken as part of the budget process rather than standalone is reasonable. This proposal is part of the budget, and so this will happen when it comes to full council. Indeed, this is one of many very difficult decisions that we will all need to consider next month. This Labour administration has spent 7 years doing everything we can to protect our residents from the tsunami of austerity cuts that have come our way. But now we really do have our backs against the wall and there are no good choices left. This proposal would save the council around 1.2 million a year. If this doesn't go ahead, other savings will need to be found. Contrary to what the motion says, WECA will absorb the cost of these staff without changes to the levy. In the devolution deal, WECA has strategic transport powers, so transferring strategic transport staff to WECA, The authority with power over strategic transport is a logical proposal. We recognise that the combined authority is far from perfect, and Bristol City Council will continue to work with WECA on these projects and will still veto any regional proposals that aren't in our interests. In relation to the City Planning Department, we note that many of these staff are also transport related, but we think everyone will welcome the reintroduction of a chief planner who will bring a planning voice back to the top table. We do appreciate that there are arguments for and against these changes, but any decision will need to be balanced with local government's financial situation, and supporting this motion may mean a reduced budget for parks, libraries, support for the worst off, or other frontline services. For that reason, and for other points in the motion, we'll be abstaining. As I think Councillor Plowden knows, the work around the workplace parking levy isn't complete. At least two key recent developments, the clean air zone and the worsening cost of living crisis, need to be factored into the report before it is ready. Indeed, Leicester recently dropped their plans to implement a workplace parking levy in the current economic climate. Leicester Council found the tax would be passed on to motorists. Teachers, hospital workers and care home staff would all have to pay more tax during a cost of living crisis. We need to make a fully considered decision before burdening our residents with extra taxes at this time. Finally, I would highlight that the motion states that very little progress has been made to the transport strategy in a rounded and balanced way. I would remind everybody that 12 years of Tory and Lib Dem cuts have gutted backroom staff, severely restricting Council's ability to deliver on their priorities. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rippington. I'd now like to call on Councillor Steve Smith to speak on behalf of the Conservative group.
Thank you, my Lord Mayor. Our group will support this motion, but it does leave a bit of a bitter taste in my mouth, I have to say. And that's not because of anything that Councillor Plowden's put in it. I think what's in the motion is straightforward, it's pragmatic, it's, dare I say, even a little bit reassuringly dull. And I mean that in a very good way. That's a compliment. But it's upsetting that we have to have this as a motion at all. We shouldn't have to spend our time here debating what ought to be the bread and butter of basic good governance. And the fact that we're doing it speaks to me of broken relationships, both within this council and outside in the wider world. In here, this is hardly the first time that we've heard complaints in this room that councillors don't understand what's going on because information just isn't available. And I think it's an unfortunate culture, and maybe it's inevitable within the mayoral model, that scrutiny is seen as something to be avoided and to be held at arm's length, rather than a supportive process to be embraced. I think good scrutiny, given the information, makes things better. It makes decisions better, and we can do much better, but we need to be willing to share information and to be open in decision making. Looking outside the council, there's clearly broken relationships between this authority and WECA. Now, I agree with what David said in public forum and others about the need for a proper combined transport authority. I spent 10 years living in Manchester before I moved here, where one has existed for years, and it works. To me, that's a no-brainer. But I'm sorry to say that WECA is simply not in a fit state right now to manage that function. We all saw the audit report a month or two ago, with a number of statutory recommendations. This is almost unheard of, essentially saying that leaders within WECA are simply not capable of working together. And it's so sad because it had so much promise. When WECA was created, it should have been about pooling and about sharing responsibility for the benefit of all of us, because our lives and our journeys don't begin and end at the boundary between Bristol and South Gloss, or South Gloss and Baines. But what should have been a forum for sharing, sadly, has turned into basically a battlefield where everyone's trying to protect their own smaller vested interests. The motion says that Bristol needs to retain the ability to negotiate with WECA. Well, in an ideal world, we shouldn't need to negotiate with WECA, we should be WECA, but I agree, Councillor Plowden, that's where we are, sadly. So if we had governance that was more collaborative, less combative, perhaps we wouldn't need this motion, but I suspect, sadly, we might have to wait until 2024 for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Can I now call on Councillor Sarah Classic to speak on behalf of the Liberal Democrat group, please?
Thank you. It's true, as a number of people have said, Bristol is facing a huge number of transport issues right now. Just last month in this chamber we discussed the issues with buses for our franchising motion. There's also, we constantly have public forum pieces from people talking about various active travel, cycle routes, walking routes, all of these things. It seems crazy that right now to get rid of our transport and planning departments, right when we're in the middle of all these crises. We are about to face a major climate emergency. We need all this part of Bristol. We are seeing major projects which will fundamentally change the face of Bristol. Temple Quarter, Western Harbour, however they turn out, will have a huge impact on residents of Bristol, and we need that planning, that strategy here in the city, not just in WECA. We may not be able to tackle these issues as a city without strong departments and without the council being part of these plans, and especially if Bristol staff are transferred out to WECA, something that the unions here are today opposing. Do we really want to lose that talent out of our city? Bristol needs to be in a position to be part of these strategic decisions. We need to work with WECA and be able to petition WECA for the interests of our city. As we move to the committee system, councillors will have more power in making these decisions over Bristol, and by extension, so will the residents who elect us to represent them. To take away these vital services has the potential to jeopardise that power the residents are gaining. We will be voting for this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Classic. Finally, I'd like to come to Councillor Gary Hopkins from the Knoll Community Party to hear your views.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. It's unfortunate, as has been said already, that we've got to have the debate in this way. There is a strong argument that in time that we actually move a lot of this capability to WECA. At the moment, though, because WECA is not in good shape and there is disagreement between this authority and WECA on a number of issues, we need to have people working for us who've got the expertise. And if we don't have our internal team at the moment, we'll be going to consultants and we'll be paying twice as much for advice that you can't necessarily 100% rely upon. So it's a matter of regret that we have to actually say no to this transfer, because in the long term it's the sensible thing to do, but it's not right at this time. And we need to have, as has been said, a proper combined transport authority. At the moment, that's not going to happen. But that's what we've got to push for. And if we need officers within this authority to help push in that direction, then that's why we've got to have our team internally here. So we'll be supporting the motion.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor, do you wish to respond? Okay. So back to Councillor Plowden. Do you wish to sum up?
Yes, please. Thanks for all the support, and I think we all agree that WECA is a great opportunity, but we need further debate, and I'm glad to hear that we're going to have that further debate as part of budget and other setting. That's the whole point of this motion. Neither the vision nor the benefits are clear, and there is a worry that these decisions could be taken because it gives the delegated authority to a director, not back to the council. So that's something that is really behind this motion. The fact that we need to make budget cuts, well, actually within the Cabinet report itself, the Finance Officer's own assessment was that the teams cost very little, that this sending them to WECA may not save any money, and actually that this option could be more expensive and could mean that we have to send money back to the government. So I'm a little bit worried about that. Let's get the capital recharge rate right, because actually within the capital recharge rate, you can legitimately pay for a strategy team. WECA is the authority for transport strategy. Well, we'd like to think that's true, but it doesn't actually have the powers of an integrated transport authority. It doesn't have precept raising powers. And so really, part of the debate we need to have is taking the time to actually see how we can raise the overall ambition for transport across the west of England by improving WECA, by doing our bit and then pursuing an Act of Parliament. This is not going to happen overnight, so let's not rush into this. The Auditor's report recommends closer collaboration between WECA and constituent authorities moving forwards. And the Metro Mayor said just last week at a scrutiny commission that he sees officer-led collaboration across our authorities being a key driver of this. So we've got to retain some expertise within the council. The current model of WECA commissioning is that unitary authorities will deliver the actual projects on the ground. And that's something that we really need. We've got such a lot of funding. We've got such a lot of things hitting the ground in 2 to 3 years' time. We're going to need really good, close collaboration within Bristol to make those projects work and still be able to move around our city. And pushing it all to WECA is not the way to do that. There's something about transparency in all of this. Just a few months ago, Councillor Alexander stood up in this chamber and argued that the workplace parking levy report should be shared with the full council because it's such an important decision that it would need to be debated by this council, and amended that motion. And what's happened? I've had 2 freedom of information requests for that very report turned down. That, I believe, is treating this chamber with disrespect. So our new government's arrangements will require more, not less, collaboration between members and officers and with WECA, and for decisions to be taken in full light of transparent working rather than in the shadows. That's what the people of Bristol voted for this year. We need to build and create a WECA that works and a future city that works, but not to slash and burn. So for all these reasons, I urge you to vote for this Green Party motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Plowden. And we will indeed move to the vote now. It is an e-vote, so if you're all sitting in your correct seats, as soon as I get the nod. Okay, so you should vote now, please. You've got 15 seconds. Okay, so we can see that the votes are 44, 19 abstain and 0 against, so the motion has been carried. Congratulations. Thank you. So, thank you. Thank you to all councillors and to all others who attended today's meeting. The next meeting of the full council will be the budget meeting on Tuesday, the 21st of February. So I look forward to seeing you all then, and I wish you a very pleasant evening. Thank you all very much. This meeting is over.